Don't we all? And Judith worked for 15 years as a gardener at Saunders Farm, and she now is a garden consultant during the growing season, volunteers as a master gardener, giving advice at clinics. She's the president of the Stittsville Goulburn Hort Society, writes a short weekly column for them called Veggie Bites, and that's on their website. In the winter, she gives talks, she writes articles for magazines and publications, and she is also an artist on top of all this and does watercolor and pen and inks. So let's welcome Judith, and she's going to talk a little about Into the Night, making your garden more night beautiful. Judith, over to you.
Okay, I'm just getting this thing up here. There we go. Now, does everybody see that? Okay, just a second here. All right, so just a second. I'm going to talk to you this evening about going into the night garden, which sounds lovely and spooky, but it isn't really. So we're going to talk about going from the day to the night. I'm going to discuss various colors, plants, trees, shrubs, and things that you can use in your garden for a night garden. I'll talk about scent. I'll talk about the life that comes out at night and adding light to your garden. As you can see here at this example I've given you with these nasturtiums, in the daytime, you have these lovely bright yellow flowers with visible weeds. And at the side, you have lovely deep yellow flowers and the weeds fade away. In my mind, that makes night gardens absolutely perfect. You don't have to worry about your weeds. So what is a night garden? A night garden is your garden at night. It can be any size that you want. You can have a night garden in a pot. You can have it on a balcony, in a back garden. You can have acreage. Basically, it's being aware of the garden that you have in the day and how you can accentuate it at night. And what would you use it for? Well, in my opinion, I find that it's actually a really good thing to have during these COVID times because we're allowed a certain number of people outside. So you could have people over to your house, have a party, and use your night garden as a backdrop. And I'll talk more about that as we go along. You want to be aware of the color of your plantings for a night garden. Of course, it makes sense that if you had light colors like white and silver, like this Dusty Miller here, they're going to pop right out in the nighttime. But don't forget, you can also have things like pale yellows, pale blues, any of the pastels, purples and lavenders and pinks, and they're also going to come alive in the nighttime. So what you want to do is to have these lighter colors coming forward and allow the darker foliage and the darker flowers to go into the sink into behind. If we start in the springtime, apple blossoms, many fruit trees, in fact, have bright white and pink flowers that in the evening, there they are right on the branches, ready to look like little stars in the evening. Not only that, little have a lot of scent, varying degrees of scent. Now, I have a monarch flowering crabtree that's sort of a deep purple color, so it does not show off much in the evening. However, it has a huge scent. So I use that layer of scent in my garden as it is beside another apple tree that has these lovely white flowers. So I'm covered on all bases. And if you know, if you have a lot of scent, that's going to attract things like moths and butterflies. So in the daytime, I get the butterflies and hummingbirds all over my apple trees. And in the evening, I start with the nighttime pollinators. The other nice thing about growing fruit trees, of course, is fruit. So that's a bonus at the end of it all. As we move further on into spring, you get things like daffodils. Now, I'm stressing daffodils here because I don't know if any of you have an issue with deer or with squirrels. Uh, Daffodils tend to be under the radar when it comes to things like that. Deer don't necessarily pay them a lot of mind, and the squirrels don't dig them up as much because the bulbs are poisonous, so they really don't want to eat them. The nice thing too about daffodils and narcissus is you can get various sizes. You can get them as dwarf, or you can get them as tall, like the King Alfred, those big, big yellow daffodils. They have a scent, they attract pollinators, and they grow from earliest spring all the way through into midsummer. So they're a really good investment as far as I'm concerned with bulbs. I've had tulips and things, and after a while they tend to die down, but daffodils and narcissus will just get bigger, and they give you a lot of bang for your buck, as it were. You can also cut them and bring them in as a flower in a vase and have a huge scent in your house. Sweet Sicily is another springtime flower, and those little white flowers, they look like stars. And as the dusk goes down, they really pop out against the foliage. You don't really smell them that much as you go past, except if you crush one of the leaves and then you get a heavy licorice scent. Sweet Sicily used to be one of the main sugar substitutes in Victorian times. And I have a friend who makes stewed rhubarb using Sweet Sicily leaves instead of sugar. I like this particular plant. It can be a bit of a bully with it likes to self-seed everywhere. However, if you try to grow it, it gets very fussy. So I find it almost better to dig out the little seedlings than try to grow it from seed. I like magnolias because as dusk comes, you get these little star-like flowers or butterfly-like flowers on the tree because they come before the leaves do. So they really, really stand out in a springtime, nighttime garden. Really nice. And again, you're going to get a lot of scent as well. I find with the doubles though, because they're a bit more hybridized, the scent goes down. As you get into people fiddling more with your plants, you'll find it loses things like scent and taste. Peonies are another favorite of mine, and they are usually in the whites and pinks, and they come alive again at nighttime, and you can see them. This is a dusk shot, and you can see how they are really coming alive against the dark foliage. Now, I tend to take blurry pictures sometimes, and I apologize. My daughter constantly chastises me for it. But in my mind, I can see that lovely glowing peony, and I think it's just lovely. Of course, I try to stake my peonies as much as possible because you get that gorgeous, big, fluffy flower, and then the mother of all thunderstorms happens and they're all flat on the ground. So if at all possible with your peonies, try to give them some support as you go by. I thought I'd show this one. This is a Clematis recta, and it is something we don't normally see, but it has a scent that's very similar to gardenias and those little tiny butterfly-like flowers that really, really show against the dark foliage. This might be an interesting addition if you're looking for something different as far as clematis go. And I looked around, you can pick things like this up at your nursery, at larger nurseries. And also if you phone them and ask them, many times they will find things like this for you. You should never underestimate the daisy. These simple little flowers, little courses in the garden. And at nighttime, you can see how that would be just a lovely big grouping of white. And the one thing about them too, for pollinators, they're what we like to call open pollinating flowers. so that the bees and butterflies have no work at all. They go right to the flower and there you go. If you have daisies, it really is worthwhile to deadhead them. I was able to extend my daisy growing days by doing that this year. That was fortunate. I didn't have a lot to do this spring, so I was able to do more deadheading. And I think deadheading is something we really need to pay attention to in our gardens if we can. And it's something we often forget to do, but it will definitely extend the season. I like daylilies a lot. I have several different colors and different types of daylilies. I'm putting this in here because for me, daylilies are like an introduction to the night. They're going to fold up by the time the nighttime comes, but you can see how they sparkle at dusk. And then as night comes, the flower's going to close and the new buds are ready to go for the next day's flower. I've got an example here, which I think is absolutely perfect. It illustrates exactly what I was thinking of, is that these are all these lovely light daylilies going through a huge hedge of them. And this is dusk, and you can see how sparkly they are for your nighttime garden. Now, another thing I'd like you to notice with this picture is that the daylilies have there's a big trench all the way around so that they stay put. They're not wandering off into the woods or into any other parts of the property. There's been a lot of talk about daylilies being invasive. Now, I find some of these fancy ones I don't find are like that, but some of them, ones like what we call tiger lilies or ditch lilies, they can really take over an area, and you have to really sort of keep on top of them or you will have them everywhere, and it takes a long time to get them out. This is a really nice example of looking after the daylilies in a way that they're not going to interfere with any other part of the garden or go into the woods. This beautiful rose, because I love roses, I have tons. This is called Polaris. I put this one in here because he's white with a tinge of pink and blooms, and then he blooms again, and then he blooms again. Has a huge scent and gets up to 8 feet tall. I think this would be a stunning centerpiece in a nighttime garden. It's a zone 2 rose. It's very difficult to find these days because it's kind of a little messy and the petals will fall. But what I like to do is go underneath it with one of those mesh bags, shake the petals, and then the little petals come down and you can save it and dry it and make your own potpourri that has quite a lot of scent to it. The bees and other pollinators absolutely love this rose as well. Now, viburnum, this is towards the end of the blooming period of my viburnum. Again, see how the contrast is against that dark foliage, just what you want into your nighttime garden. All of these flowers would make nice backdrops for your party display and that sort of thing. And these ones always have hoverflies and butterflies and bees and things all over them. Really pretty. And I love them at night. Of course, if you've got a shady area, which is also quite dark, putting hostas in there, I like to put my green and white hostas into the shade because then they add some interest and some color. But the flowers themselves are heavily scented in many, many hostas. They attract pollinators, and you can eat hostas, which I haven't, but when they come up first thing in the spring, they kind of look like little cigars, and you cut them down and fry them up, and they're very tasty, apparently. I just don't want a chance messing up my hostas, and that's why I don't do it. I like to have them, and my toad lives under my hostas, so I don't even have slugs, so that's pretty good. I find often they're put in the wrong place a lot of hostas that get too much sun. They really, really do well in shade or partial shade. This is what I've found with my hostas. And I highly recommend them as a way of, especially the green and white ones. If you were having that as a border into your night, they will really pop. Another rose, up in the corner, you can see Madam Hardy. Now that one doesn't get as many pollinators as Oscar Peterson does, because if you notice with Oscar Peterson, he opens way up, and that is just an invitation to every bee and other little moth and any other pollinator to come and visit. This is where my fireflies go. They love this rose. So I highly recommend the Canadian Artist series of roses. I have all but one. And I also have many, many of the Explorer roses. They are hardy and they are just loved by pollinators. Here's the fairy. The fairy was an AAS winner several years ago. I like her because she's tiny and sweet. And you can see here at dusk, she's just glowing against that dark foliage and the nondescript weeds we won't talk about. And she's doing very well in the garden. And then another one, of course, are the dahlias. Dahlias in your nighttime garden also sparkle. Here, over here, the Deerhurst sunrise, you can see the gold coming through. That's a beautiful hot summer look. And then at night, against the dark foliage, it's a totally different look. And I'll talk a bit more about light. This is something you could put light underneath and let it glow up in your nighttime garden. I wanted to talk about this one because its name has changed. It's been lumped in with bugbane for many years, but this is the one that flowers in September, which is a great time to have it because we don't necessarily have a lot of light colored flowers flowering in September. Bugbane flowers around in June and it smells a little funky. So Semisifuga is, this particular one is now known as Actea ramosa atropurpurea. And it is absolutely glorious, but it's one you have to make sure if you're going to buy it, that it's the one that flowers in September. It has a gorgeous scent and the bees are all over it. And at nighttime, as the wind blows, you can see it go back and forth, just little flashes of white, especially if there's a full moon. Now, I am a real weed person. I like all the different natives and I like the weeds because often I use weeds as a catch plant for bugs that I don't want. They'll go eat the weeds and I get to keep my plants. Queen Anne's lace I like. I love the little sparkly flowers and they will grow in areas where nothing else is going to grow. Children love them. They make bouquets and all sorts of stuff. There is one thing though, that some people have developed sensitivities to Queen Anne's lace. You might get a tiny bit of a rash. So be aware of that if you have children playing with it. But I've never had an issue, but it doesn't mean that it isn't there. Now, garlic chives is a fascinating plant as far as I'm concerned because I love the way it moves in the night, in the wind. The stem that the flower is on is very, very solid, very hard. So as the wind blows, the stem goes back and forth and it causes a lot of motion and interest. If this is a plant that would look really cool on a front porch in a pot or on a balcony. It's something that you could have, you would be able to have pollinators with it. You would have your nighttime garden feature with it, and you can eat it too. You don't eat the flower stem thing, that's too tough, but all the other little bits are just like chives with a garlic taste to them. It's really delicious. And they're always covered with one pollinator or another. Hydrangeas, oh, aren't they lovely? They are, again, pollinator plants, of course. Your paniculatas or your the little Annabelle down here, just lovely. But the one thing about them, if you have, say, a hedge of them behind your party garden, that would be quite the sight. It would be absolutely glorious to have something like that popping out of the dark foliage. I think they're a wonderful background plant, something to put at the back and then build the other plants into the front. I'm interested in this plant after I talked to Brian Carson. He was telling me about his adventures at one of the botanical gardens, and he said he went around the back and there was this stunning display, and he went around the back around dusk. So all these foxtail lilies, there was a huge path of them, and they were swaying back and forth, and they were light and they were bright and they were phenomenal. Apparently, what had happened is somebody had weeded out a number of them and just dumped them at the back. And actually, after a time, they looked so spectacular, it became an actual attraction at the botanical garden. And that's how things evolve. But it also shows you that if you're going to get into this particular lily, be aware that this is a very tough lily and it will spread, and it's a bit of a thug. So you have to keep that in mind. It took me a long time to get this yucca to bloom. This is where I used to work, and the yucca was over in the shade. So I picked it up and moved it over into the sun, and poof, look at it go. Beautiful scent. And again, at night, this is where you're going to get a lot of moths, because you get that. And it's not a white, it's a cream, it's a green cream color, just beautiful. It's an amazing plant, but I have found it will bloom if you find the exact place it wants to be. Otherwise, you'll just have lots of foliage. I'm putting this one in because it has a heavy scent. It's a beautiful white flower. It really typifies kind of what you would want in a nighttime garden. But I wanted to caution just how poisonous it is. So this is something that you have to be aware of if you're going to have this particular plant in your garden, as well as its buddy, the angel trumpet, because these seed pods are very interesting to children, and cool. It looks like a little dress. So this is a plant you really want to be sure is not going to be eaten by animals or played with by children. I always say that. On the other hand, if you want a spectacular evening display, there it is. I'm going to talk a little bit about the scent that you have at night. Most of the nighttime pollinators want scent, and you'll notice a lot of the plants that don't really particularly smell that much in the daytime have a heavier scent at night. It's like the oils come up and their scent is magnified. Starting with honeysuckles. Now, the wild honeysuckle, which is in and around most gardens and is also looked at as an invasive, although it has a lovely scent and it has a lot of pollinators. If you don't really keep on top of it, it's going to take over. So be very wary when you're dealing with honeysuckles. The honeysuckle vine, I have it all along my fence. I just love it. It's easy to prune and to control. So I think that's probably one that I would stick to. And it also has a beautiful scent, and the color really comes alive at night. If you're lucky enough to have a sheltered spot, you might be able to keep a jasmine all year round. Most people I know have their jasmines outside and then bring them inside for the winter time. They will do quite well as an inside plant over the winter. I would love to do that, except I have too many cats, so I can't. But the scent is something that is going to bring forth many, many moths and many nighttime pollinators. So it's really a good pot to have. Say if you're outside at your party and you have some pots of jasmine around, that will scent the entire area. Evening primrose is another. You know, it's something pretty and yellow in our garden during the day, but when it comes to the night, that's when you want to go and give a good sniff to your evening primrose and discover just how deep that scent really is. You'll also see night pollinators on it. They love it. This is my personal favorite. I love Nicotiana. This is Nicotiana alba. But my most favorite one is the Nicotiana sylvestris because it has such a heavy, heavy, heavy scent. It's more difficult to find. You'll get seeds that say that it's Nicotiana sylvestris, but it usually turns out to be Nicotiana alba, which is this one. The sylvestris has a much longer stem to the flower. And as I say, it has a heavier scent. And at night, the scent triples. It's just so heavy and so sweet. It's also known as flowering tobacco. And with the sylvestris, you can actually, I heard you can smoke it like tobacco. I never have. But because it's like a flowering tobacco, this is a plant you don't want to put near your tomato plants. Tomatoes have a terrible little disease called tobacco mosaic, which is why you never smoke near a tomato, you know, have the nicotine there, and you don't plant Nicotiana near them, or you might end up getting tomato mosaic. I like to plant my Nicotiana all around my roses because the aphids are attracted to Nicotiana and they will stick to the flower area and die. And that way my roses are nice and clean and I just have lumpy looking Nicotiana, but they still smell beautiful in the evening. Many of you will have received Easter lilies, and that's another heavily scented, lovely light lily that we can put out into the garden often, unless it's been really forced in the greenhouse. Remember that the lilies are poisonous as well. You have to be careful if you have animals or children, but they will attract things like the hummingbird moth and hummingbirds themselves and butterflies and the hawk moth and all these other things. For lilies are a wonderful flower for that. This little darling is something that would be beautiful in a nighttime garden. Night scented stalks are an old flower, a Victorian flower, and they have fallen out of favor, but they're starting to make a bit of a comeback now. So you can find them easily at a nursery. And if you ask, they can definitely get them in for you. Their scent is the same sort of idea as the Nicotiana. It triples at night. It has a heavy, heavy scent, and it's a wonderful sort of a cottage garden flower. It's one of those ones you'd put sort of towards the back and allow the scent to come forward. Now, this one is the party flower of the Victorian garden. After supper, the ladies and gentlemen be walking around the garden, and the gas plant, it puts out like an oily gas in the evening. It exudes this odor and gas. And if you put a flame near it, poof, it goes up like you wouldn't believe. So as a party joke, often the host would light gas plants on fire to amuse the ladies. I don't recommend that you light all your gas plants on fire because then it's not that good for the plant, but maybe one over to the side just to show what happens when you put a flame nearby. It is a fascinating plant, has a beautiful scent, and in the daytime, it attracts a lot of hoverflies and butterflies. Now, this is often seen as a wildflower. However, you can get bigger ones. I have one that has this lovely white flower. I've always seen it when I was younger as like a bladder flower, where you take the flower and you push it down on your hand and it goes pop, which is lots of fun when you're a kid. But it has a lovely, delicate scent and this huge whiteness to it, so that you can have areas of it in your garden. It kind of fades away in the daytime. It can just sort of hide in behind the other plants, but that white flower pops out at night. You're going to have a lot of things in your garden at nighttime, not just raccoons and things. There are moths. They're like the butterflies of night, and fireflies and bats, for just a few. I don't know if anyone's ever had a tomato hornworm, but the tomato hornworm, out a good branch of your tomato, but you'll get a 5-spotted hawk moth out of it. So in my mind, it's a great investment. However, if you are a diligent tomato grower and you have your marigolds attracting your beneficial parasitic wasps, the parasitic wasp is going to take care of the tomato hornworm. So you're not really going to have very many moths. But if you do get one of these buddies and kind of keep it separate, maybe you could make it so that you could have this moth. It is absolutely stunning. This is my favorite, the Luna moth. I think they are absolutely beautiful. Unfortunately, this is a threatened species. The caterpillar eats native trees, but very little, just doesn't eat a lot, not enough to really be a bother. And it is also a food source for many birds and animals. And the Luna moths are also a food source. But unfortunately, people will just spray everything because there's a gypsy moth or something like that. And caterpillars like these will die, and a whole section of the food chain disappears. So that's why I'm always telling people, be aware of your pest. If you have these caterpillars, they're not going to do a lot of damage. They're going to do a lot of good for a lot of other creatures. If you have things like the gypsy moth or other things like that, that's when you go and you find a specific reason, thing to get rid of them. Fireflies are like the canaries in the coal mine. They will not survive an area that is full of chemicals. See, I'm a monarch watch garden, so I can't have chemical fertilizer or chemical pesticides. And I get a lot of fireflies. You want to have heavily scented flowers for them, and you want to have a nice clean environment for them. The other thing I do is I leave out pans of water on the ground, as well as my bird bath. And I make sure there's rocks and things in it so they have somewhere to perch. I always disturb the surface of the water every 24 hours so the mosquito larvae can't hatch. And I get lots and lots of these beautiful fireflies. I also have lots of bats, and I love bats. And I think that would be a very entertaining thing to have at your party. They are up high enough. They're not going to go in your hair. And they do these acrobatics in the night. They come out around late dusk and they start chasing all the mosquitoes and all the bugs that are up in the air. They're absolutely beautiful. Now, I have a bat box that the wildlife people put up, but I said, I think my bats like to live in the cedars better than in a box. And so far, that's where they have been. But, it would be neat if they would move into the box too. I'm going to talk a bit about light. Light is a very controversial thing these days in your garden, because it's really not the best idea to light up your garden like a Walmart parking lot. You want to kind of keep it mysterious. You want the light to add to your garden, not to be the focus of your garden. That's why you can do things like candles, fairy lights, solar lights. And if you want to plug a light into your garden, why not put it on a timer? It's very important for us to have a dark time at night to sleep, and it's important for plants and animals to have a dark time at night to sleep as well. Here's the little fairy garden I made. And you can see this would be something you could put on a front porch or on a balcony. Just a few plants and a little bit of fun. That water there's pebbles, and then I filled it up with water so that the bees and butterflies can have a drink and not worry about drowning. And then there's the solar light at the back. So there's solar light there, and if you put it over to the other side, you see it's all spooky, dark, and mysterious, which is lots of fun, especially if you have kids that are helping out with it. The Tiki Torch is something that we used to have a lot of in the past, not so much anymore, but it's also a wonderful light in your garden. But in my mind, I think you really need to police it, because I don't know about you guys, but we get a lot of burn bans where I am. And so I'm very careful about open flames in the garden. Here's a really good example of candles in the garden. Again, as long as you're aware of where the fire is, you should be fine. I love these little mason jars. They're all contained, and then you can float your candles on the water. If you have a pool, you could do that. I really suggest you don't float it on the pool if you're swimming in there, because that would be a mess. But if you have a pond or something like that, that would really, really work. It'd be very pretty. Now, this I love. It's like little solar fairy lights in a container that's hanging from a tree. Just beautiful. The one on the right is at my house. I have this little fairy lights in a sort of a crackly glass container, and it hangs up there, and the birds play around it. Unfortunately, as you can tell by the bare branches, the gypsy moth got at my tree. I caught most of them, but not all of them. And this is in the driveway. Do you see with the solar light how it's very centered? It's just this one little area. Instead of having a floodlight that opens up your whole world, this gives it a little bit of a, just a tang there that makes it fun and interesting without it being overwhelming. This is a solar panel, as you can see on the left. The neat thing about these is you get a solar panel, and then your solar lights are on a string. So suppose you have a lovely big cedar tree or any kind of tree. You put your solar panel directly in the sun, and then you tuck your lights up underneath so your tree is underlit. At night, you do not see the solar panel. You only see the lovely little lights that are lit underneath. On my bucket list is Butchart Gardens. I would love to go see this place, but you can imagine having gone through the gardens all day, and then at night, you'd have a totally different experience with the way that it's lit. You can change the whole ambience and the whole way that you look at a garden through how you use your lighting. This is the Atlanta Botanical. This is the one where Brian saw the Foxtail Lilies. And you can see the sculpture on the right that was inspired by the Foxtail Lilies. Aren't these sculptures gorgeous? It just makes everything so special and so different than what it would have been during the daytime. Montreal is doing what I was talking about, is underlighting the tree so that it gives a totally different impression of the whole garden. I love this one. It looks so mysterious. And then, of course, my imagination gets going, and I'm thinking, oh, is there something spooky at the other end? But you never know. I like the way that they've used the vines with the light. So you're never quite sure where the light is coming from. And this one, they've used the landscape. So the lights are on the fence and they're reflecting into the water. which is really neat. And see how they've underlit the trees as well to create a totally different atmosphere. You can even think of the garden in the winter time. Here, this is the rock garden at the Toronto Botanical Garden. And look, you can see it's all lit up for winter. Just because it's winter doesn't mean your garden isn't still a garden. It just is always, always there for you. Someday I'd like to check out the Montreal Lantern Festival. That would be something. I suppose I could float a few lanterns on my pond, but I don't know how my frogs would take it. Remember, if you're going to be doing a nighttime garden, add your plants and lights slowly. Make sure that you're satisfied. Okay, I like this, I like that, because it's easy to kind of take off with it, and then it becomes overwhelming and it looks kind of chintzy. So you want to take your time and make sure this is exactly what you want. Check out lights all around you in the neighborhood and see how they're doing it and their plants. And then you can compare and say, okay, I want one of those. And I like how they did that. And I'm going to adapt this way. And remember, it's not the amount of lights you have. You can have just a little pot and with a light in it, and it's going to be a beautiful nighttime garden. Anyway, thank you very much for your time. And do you have any questions?
Does anyone have any questions for Judith? That's a very lovely presentation.
Oh, thank you.
Some great ideas on what to add. And maybe a reminder to people that when it gets dusky out, go out and just carefully walk around your garden. What catches your eye? Is it in the right place, or would it be better